Hello, today we are going to be exploring Chapter 2 of Campbell's Biology, which begins our discussion of the chemical context of life. The concept that we are going to be discussing today is Concept 2.1, which is matter consists of chemical elements in pure form and in combinations called compounds. Now here we probably have a lot of words that we may not be very comfortable with, such as matter and element and compounds, pure form. All of these things we are going to discuss and try and get a better grasp on. So to start off with, everything around us, all the organisms, the planet itself, everything in the universe is composed of something called matter. Matter is simply anything that takes up space and has mass. Okay? Easier way of phrasing this is matter is anything you can touch. Okay? Now, as we started exploring matter, we started breaking it up and realizing that most matter is actually a combination of lots of different things, or mixtures of different things. As we get better and better at breaking things down into smaller and smaller pieces, we eventually reached a spot where we couldn't purify anything further without it ceasing to behave like matter. Okay? And when we break things down into these smallest portions, this concept of element comes into play. Okay, element is a substance that cannot be broken down into other substances by chemical reactions. We can, in fact, break elements down, but when we do that, it kind of loses a lot of what we define matter as. Okay, gets a little complicated there, but an element is essentially something that has defined features, behaves in a particular way, and we can't purify it any further, and we can't break it down. Now, using an example here might be helpful, so I'll give you two. Okay, one being sodium, which is something that kind of has a metallic sheen, but it's kind of soft, clay-like. You can actually cut it with a knife. It's solid in nature, and it has this kind of reddish, grayish hue. Okay. Another element is chlorine. Chlorine is green, and it is also a gas, so we consequently have it here in a bottle. Okay. If you were to open this up, it would just diffuse into the environment and kind of disappear. We wouldn't be able to see it. So here we have concentrated chlorine in a bottle. Okay. You can see here that it is green. If you were to pick it up and look at this bottle, you would see that it is not a liquid splashing around, that it is in fact a gas. Okay, two very, very different things. Okay, and all of these, if you attempt to break it down further, kind of loses all of its characteristics and a lot of what defines matter. Okay, so it can't be broken down any further. We also have these things called compounds. Okay, and a compound is a substance consisting of two or more elements in a fixed ratio. Okay, so it could be one sodium and one chloride, or it could be two chlorides and one sodium. Whatever it is, it has to be in a particular fixed ratio. So one of this to one of that, or two of this to two of that, or maybe it's one of this and one of that and one of this other thing, all in that same ratio. Interestingly, these compounds have characteristics that are different from those of the elements that make it up. Okay, so let's go back to our example of sodium and chlorine. These are both elements. And let me give you a couple other unique characteristics of sodium. Okay, sodium, in addition to being metallic and kind of soft clay-like and all those things I said before, if you put it in water, it explodes. Okay, like literally, it explodes. Chlorine is in addition to being green and a gas, is also toxic. Okay, it has been used in warfare as a gas agent, most recently in Syria. Okay, so it would be kind of interesting to think about, well, let's combine sodium and chlorine together, and maybe we would get something that both explodes and is toxic, which might be kind of cool or very frightening, one of the two, but we don't get that. Okay, what we actually get is table salt, otherwise known as sodium chloride. If you look at sodium chloride, it looks nothing like this. Okay, it is solid like sodium, but unlike being a soft, malleable type of metal, it is a fairly fragile crystal. If you try and cut this with a knife, the little crystals just shatter into pieces. Okay? Clearly very different from chlorine, which is a gas. It is also neither explosive nor toxic, at least in reasonable quantities. Okay? So, when we start talking about compounds, recognize that those compounds have their own unique characteristics, okay, which can be very different from what makes them up. Alright, so when we look at all of the elements we can find out there, and there are quite a few of them, we oftentimes arrange them into this thing called the periodic table. Okay, you guys have probably seen this before, and you might recognize that each one of these little blocks is a different element. Okay, if you don't, well, that's what it is. Okay, now, fortunately for us, we don't have to deal with all of this. Okay, because only 20-25% of these elements are important to life. Okay, primarily it's actually 4 elements that are important to us: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So here's hydrogen, here's carbon, here's nitrogen, and here's oxygen. These 4 elements make up 96% of all living matter. Okay, that means 96% of you is these 4 elements. And that's it. Okay? Now, what about the remaining 4%? Okay? Most of that 4% is made up of a smaller collection out of this list. So we're going to take that periodic table away and just replace it with this more simple list. Okay? So, about 3.7% of your body is made up of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 elements here: calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chloride, and magnesium. Okay, and you can see that they all range in how much of it is in your body. All these together make up 3.7%. Okay, there are a few elements out there that exist in very small quantities within our body, but even though they play a very small part, they can be very important parts, okay? Such as iron. Iron is important for us to be able to breathe, okay? We'll talk more about that later, okay? These minor parts we refer to as trace elements because we do require them and we would not live without them, but we don't need very much, okay? Just minute quantities. So, as a recap, concept 2.1 is matter consists of chemical elements in pure form and in combinations called compounds. So again, an element cannot be broken down into other substances by chemical reactions. If you break it down, it kind of loses its matterish context. Compounds is a substance consisting of 2 or more elements in a fixed ratio. Again, these compounds can look and behave very differently than the elements that make it up. There are quite a few elements out there in nature, but we only care about a very small fraction of them. Primarily 4 oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, which make up 96%, and then a smattering of others that are also important to us, but make up much less. So there we have our beginning of Chapter 2, Concept 2.1.